Prior to installation, you may want to check the height, width, and depth of your console. The reason is that the Dolphin Pro2 T-top installs to the floor and by standoffs to a cross member that mount to your console. In my case, my console was actually too low to mount the standoffs directly to the cross brace. I had to make some accommodations in my placement and where I mounted the standoffs in order to be able to make the installation work correctly for me. When you first open the box, you should see all your tubing wrapped in foam. This is the T-top that's going to go on top, the fabric, and boxes of parts. First thing you'll need to do is take the foam off and lay out the parts and make sure you have all the parts you need. Once you have all the parts laid out, you should have 2 sets of legs, 2 upper supports, 3 pieces for the canvas support, the canvas, and a box of parts. Note that the legs, the curved part goes to the rear, and on the upper supports, the Dolphin logo plate will be mounted to the outside. The parts kit contains all the hardware necessary for the installation of the T-top. One thing to note is that there are 2 types of mounting hardware for the feet. There's a set of 16 screws, which are used for screwing directly to your deck, and there's also a set of 16 nuts and bolts and cross plates, which can be used for mounting to the deck, but you need access to the bottom of the floor. In my situation, I'm using the screws as I don't have access to the bottom. Along with the included hex keys, you will need some other tools for the installation. I would suggest a tape measure, a level, a pencil for marking, some Scotch tape, a number 3 Phillips head bit, a drill motor and bits, I'll show you the bits later, a ratchet driver, and a wrench, size 10 metric. While not required, you may want a hex bit that can fit into a ratcheting driver to speed up the installation of the small hex bolts on the top pipe clamps. Once you've identified all the pieces, first thing you need to do is to decide where you will locate the T-top relative to your center console. This is going to vary by the size of your center console, your boat, and what works for you. In my case, I see that if I want to do a brace, my T-top's too low back here to do a brace, but I can do a brace up here in the front. So I think I'm actually going to locate mine a little forward and see if I can't put one brace right there and do the other brace up here. From taking the measurements and getting this exactly where I want it, I've determined I need to remove the windshield, and I probably need to take this antenna off too. For the next step, you want the 4 aluminum standoff kits that go between the legs and the console. Specifically, we're going to want the long aluminum spacer and the plastic nylon washer. There's a plastic washer that goes on the end of the spacer. If you put it on a piece of plastic tape and tape it to the end of the spacer, this way you get the right spacing when placing the spacer and the legs. Get the 4 flat rubber spacers. When you're figuring out where everything needs to go, I would put the rubber spacers under the feet. This makes sure that if you're marking the spacers on the cross member, that you get it to be the correct height. In order to get the legs placed right, I need to know where I want to put my spacers. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of check and see where I think my spacers can go. I think I found a good place. So now I'm going to make life a little easier for myself by putting a zip tie up here just to keep the leg from falling over. Give me a little bit of tension when I'm trying to put these spacers in. Now, the spacer might still fall down, but I'm hoping not. Next, I check to see that my console is level. This is important because I want to get the legs level relative to the console. I want to grab a level and just check that the legs are level. Yeah, pretty good. You want to measure between the front legs and between the back legs. This distance needs to be the same between front and back. This step is critical because the legs need to be square to the console. They also need to be squared so that you can tilt the top down. If the measurement between the front legs and the back legs is different, you may have to make an adjustment to your installation. You will probably have to cut down one set of spacers in order to get the measurement to equal front and back. In my case, the width of my console was narrower in the front than in the back. So I made an adjustment by cutting down the rear spacers in order to get the distance between the front legs and the distance between the back legs to be the same. This would give me a square installation. I did not show all those steps here as they won't pertain to everybody's situation. For the next step, we want the 2 upper side supports, the 4 brushed aluminum pipe sockets that will mount on top of those supports, and 4 of the medium hex bolts. You will want to unscrew the top half of the 4 pipe clamps. This will make the installation easier in order to get the tool onto the hex bolt that mounts down through the center into the top of the leg. While not required, I like to put some thread locker on these bolts. Bottom half of the sockets mount to the top of the legs. Just sits in like that. Screw it in with the provided Allen wrench. You might have some final tightening to do when you put it all together. Since I don't have a helper, I'm going to actually mount all my pieces together in the boat. I'm going to set that up there. To fasten the upper supports to the lower legs, 2 types of hardware are included with the kit. There are 8 hex bolts with lock washers and 6 quick release knobs. If you do not plan to tilt your top forward, you can just use the 8 hex nuts and lock washers. Otherwise, you will use 6 quick release knobs and 2 of the hex bolts and lock washers. I'm going to go ahead and mount my tower pieces in the boat since I don't have a helper. I'm going to use the quick release bolts. On the front leg, you will find 3 holes. The hex bolt and lock washer goes in the center hole, and then the 2 quick release bolts go above and below that. Once you get the first side up, lift the second side up, and repeat the process, putting the hex nut in the center and the quick release bolts above and below. Next, we're going to do the installation of the T-top frame. For this, you're going to need the 8 medium-sized hex bolts and included lock washers. Now, the instructions are a little unclear about this, as they say not to use lock washers, only to use them on the legs. But there are separate larger lock washers included with the leg bolts, and there are 8 lock washers included with the medium-sized hex bolts, so I assumed it was okay to use these included lock washers. Before assembling the canopy, note the series of small holes. There's 3 of them, 1 in each section, and they all need to be on the same side. I found it was easiest to get the bolts started on one side, get them started on the other side, then go back and tighten everything up. For the next step, you want the 4 rubber pipe sleeves. The kit comes with some rubber sleeves that'll go in the sockets on top, but they're a bit big, so you might want to mark how long they are and cut off the excess. About 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and set it up here. Sets on pretty good. Go ahead and put your rubber gaskets in. Here's what the gasket should look like installed in the bottom half of the clamp. Next, I screwed down the top halves of all the pipe clamps. I didn't tighten them down all the way, as I just wanted to get the setup square for my installation of the standoffs to the console. Later, I will remove the top halves of the clamp, take down the canvas T-top frame, in order to make it so that I can loosen up the legs enough to move them out of the way to be able to mark and drill the holes in the floor to put the screws in the feet. Here, I'm measuring where I want to put my first hole through the leg and into the console. I found that installation was easiest using 3 different types of drill bits. A small bit to make a starter pilot hole, a bit slightly larger than the threaded rod, and then a long bit slightly larger than the threaded rod that can be used to go all the way through the pipe and into the console. This makes it easier to drill the holes without having to make secondary marks. Next, you're going to want to take the threaded bolt with the curved aluminum washer and cap nut installed. Push that through the pipe and through the long aluminum spacer. Then, put the nylon plastic washer at the end between the spacer and the console and insert the rod all the way through. On the inside, you're going to want to use the large aluminum washer and lock nut. I found the easiest way to tighten this up was to use a wrench on the inside and a socket and ratchet driver on the outside. Here, I'm drilling the hole through my crossmember pipe for the second standoff. Note, I'm going at an angle because of my specific situation with my console being lower than my pipe. In your installation, you will probably be drilling the hole level into your console. As before, you take the threaded bolt, the hardware, push it through the pipe and the spacer, the nylon washer, and go into the console. Put the large aluminum washer, lock nut on the inside, and again, using the wrench and ratchet driver, tighten up the other standoff. Now we're going to repeat the steps again, except on the other side. Once you have everything tightened up, we want to check level on the legs on both sides before we go ahead and mark the feet for where we want to drill the holes in the deck. Using a sharp pencil, push down through the holes in the feet and through the spacer to make 4 marks on the deck. Do this for both legs. Repeat the process on the other side, check for level, and then go ahead and mark both feet at the bottom of the legs. In order to be able to drill the holes through the feet into the deck, I found it was necessary to move the legs. In order to do this, I loosened up the cap nuts. I also found it necessary to loosen the pipe clamps up top and take the top pipe assembly down. It might be a good idea to go back and just double check your marks and make sure you've got them all correct. Next, using a drill bit slightly smaller than the screws you're going to install, drill the holes in the deck. You'll want to clean up the deck and then push the legs back into place. Next, you'll want the 16 stainless steel deck screws. Next, I put the cap nuts back on and tighten up the legs and standoffs. To drill in the screws, you're going to want a number 3 Phillips head bit that you can chuck up in your drill. I used one with an extension, trying to get the drill as straight up and down as I could, but even at that, I was still drilling at an angle, which caused me to strip out the head of some of the screws. To fix this problem, I went to the hardware store and bought a long number 3 Phillips bit. This allowed me to get the drill upright and not strip out the heads. It made the installation much easier. As before, you're going to want to loosen up the nuts, move the feet out of the way, and drill your holes. Once all the leg screws are in, go ahead and tighten the standoffs back up. Next, I lifted the top assembly into place, then replaced the gaskets and the pipe clamps, and attached the tops of all the pipe clamps loosely. Next, I measured the distance from the sidebar to the pipe clamp on each side. When the measurement is the same on both sides, the top is centered on the frame. I found this method the easiest way to center the top. Once the top is centered, you'll want to tighten the clamps. A ratchet driver and hex bit will make the installation go much faster. You'll want to work your way around all the clamps, tightening them up bit by bit. The clamps will not tighten down all the way. There will be about an 1/8 inch gap between the top and bottom part of the clamps. Once the top is all tightened down, you can install the canvas. You may want to lay it out first and look for the slightly narrower end, which is the front. I found it easiest to start at the rear, working my way around the frame, fastening the zippers and the Velcro until I got the canvas stretched out completely around the whole frame. Once attached, it should fit fairly tightly. My kit came with an accessory rod holder and an antenna mount. The rod holder has 2 clamps that mount to the bottom of the rod holder with a bolt. There's also some pins that register the clamp at the bottom of the rod holder. Simply mount the clamp and put the bolt in. There's 2 large rubber gaskets that go around the pipe and inside the pipe clamps. Mount those first, and then tighten up the back of the clamps to the clamps on the rod holder. You'll have to kind of hold it up with one hand and then get them all tight until you have it mounted. The antenna holder can be mounted on top pipe, or you can mount it as I did here on the side pipe. And here are a few pictures of the completed installation. I've had the boat out on the water a few times now, and the top is rock solid. I really like not having to deal with the bimini and being able to fish all the way around the boat. This also gives really great shade, and it's saved me from getting wet in a couple of rainstorms. Overall, I think the Dolphin Pro2 T-top is one of the best investments I've ever made in my boat.